Akashavani Mangaluru presents Voices from the Bookshelf in collaboration with Bookaholics Mangalore. Dear listeners, welcome to today's episode of Voices from the Bookshelf. In this episode, you will listen to a talk by Shubha J Rao on the book My Days by R.K. Narayan.
Among the list of beloved Indian writers in English is R.K. Narayan. Let's speak about his autobiography, My Days. My first exposure to Narayan was through a chapter from this in the English textbook in school about his grandmother making fryams and pickles for her family during the summer and how little Narayan spent his summer holidays. There was Rama the pet monkey, followed by a peacock and more. He also mentions the German battleship Emden, which shelled Madras, knocking off a few feet of the High Court compound wall and setting a tank of oil on fire. What he says about battles and warriors rings true even now. They destroy or try to for fun. Years later, when I read the autobiography, after watching Malgudi Days on Doordarshan, its full import hit me. Narayan is loved for a reason. His books are set in a world very familiar to every child in South India, primarily Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, the two places he spent time in. Madras, Coimbatore, Channapatna and Mysore appear frequently, but the star is the fictional town of Malgudi that can be any place and every place at the same time. My Days is important because it offers you a ringside view into what made R.K. Narayan the powerhouse writer he was. You also see the growth of Narayan from a naughty child to an adult who likes to live life on his own terms. As a kid, he hated school and he did not see the point of examinations. That trait continued well into his life. He writes, "A few years ago, when my daughter in exasperation threw up her studies crying, 'Why should I bother with arithmetic?' I let her drop out without a word. Hereby, she find more time at home for books and music." He did the same for his grandson, though the parents thought differently and viewed his unseen masters as complicated, sinister beings who could not be trusted. Later, Narayan writes about the time he sought love. After falling in love and out of it, usually without any reciprocation, the real thing happened in July 1933 when he went to Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu with his elder sister. He irrevocably fell in love with a girl drawing water from a street tap. This might sound surreal to today's generation, but the water tap was the beginning of many a love story back then. Though the alignment of Mars proved to be a stumbling block, he woos and ultimately marries the love of his life, Rajam. They write letters even during short periods when they have to be away, and this is a love story that's tender and caring. However, losing her at a very young age forces Narayan to confront new realities. He discovers a couple who communicates with spirits, and those conversations with Rajam helping accept what has happened. She guides him on how to handle their young daughter Hema. All of this featured in the semi-autobiographical The English Teacher, published in 1945. He began writing again prolifically. Autobiographies are rarely brutally honest, but Narayan's is. With the wisdom of age, he was 68 when he wrote it. Narayan was able to tap into nostalgia, but without romanticizing it, as most of us are prone to. As a result, his readers were able to connect better with his writing. Most kids who grew up in the South would be familiar with standing guard over the fryams their mothers and grandmothers would shape and place on the roof to dry. They would also, like Narayan, peel some half-dried ones, polish them off, and struggle to hide the stomach pain that followed. They would be familiar with the habit of packing jars of pickles for relatives, carefully carried by train or bullock carts. They would be familiar with the idea of competing with a new student in school, of making new friends, of childhood fights, and of course, finding comfort and peace at home. The chapter on making summer treats has this paragraph that captures all the sound and action in the kitchen. I quote Narayan here. "My grandmother would soon have a battalion of helpers around to help, pounding and sifting and grinding and mixing and kneading on a large scale. Her helpers were her friends, admirers, tenants and paid servants. The house resonated with a variety of orchestration. The ironclad pounder crushing, the swish of winnows, the ceaseless roar of the grinding stone and the chatter of people over it all. If you notice, you'll find that Narayan did not depend on embellishment to convey his thoughts. He kept his language simple, used precise words to convey precise actions. For those living in Karnataka, the chapters relating to his stint in Mysore and the house he built in Yadavgiri will especially appeal. The house, now a museum for Narayan, is a temple of sorts for the author's devoted fans and admirers. Anyone who has read My Days will immediately relate to the 8-window study he designed and through which sunlight still streams in. I quote Narayan here because no one says it better than him. So, I kept the Yadavgiri house as a retreat for writing. I divided my time between Lakshmipuram and Yadavgiri, enjoying the company of family in one and of my books and papers in the other. I designed a small study, a bay room with 8 windows, affording me a view in every direction. The Chamundi temple temple on the south, a variety of spires, turrets, and domes on the east, sheep and cows grazing in the meadows on all sides, railway trains cutting across the east-west slope. I had a neighbor in the next compound and hint of another 1/2 a mile away on rising ground in the west, where occasionally one could see a light at the window. I listened to the deep call of the woodcock in the still afternoons and cries of a variety of birds perching on the frangipani tree. Such perfection of surroundings, as I had already realized in my college days, was not conducive to study or writing. I spent long hours absorbed in the spectacle around and found it difficult to pull my thoughts back to writing. Subsequently, I found it helpful to curtain off a large window beside my desk so that my eyes might fall on nothing more attractive than a grey drape, and thus I managed to write 1,000 words a day and completed 2 novels and a number of short stories during the years of my isolation at Yadavgiri. End quote. Now, you can spot a breadfruit or jigujja tree outside one of the windows in the bay room. In so many ways, Narayan, though from a privileged background, got to experience some things through serendipity, much like most of us, be it making the acquaintance of Graham Greene, who took his writing to the world, or teaching in the US, or seeing his novel turn into the movie guide. That said, Narayan's writing was not by chance, it was thoughtful, though it looked effortlessly easy. There was a lot of practice to get there. In pages 64 and 65 of My Days, he writes of walks to Kukkanahalli tank with his composition book in his pocket and reading to friends who, after his treat of coffee, invariably praised the writing. Much later, he moved to Bangalore to stay with his grandmother. He writes, "On a certain day in September, selected by my grandmother for its auspiciousness, I bought an exercise book and wrote the first line of a novel as I sat in the room nibbling my pen and wondering what to write. Malgudi, with its little railway station, swam into view, all ready-made, with a character called Swaminathan running down the platform, peering into the faces of passengers and grimacing at a bearded face. This seemed to take me on the right track of writing, as day by day pages grew out of it, linked to each other. In the final draft, the only change was that Malgudi station came at the end of the story. This was a satisfactory beginning for me, and I regularly wrote a few pages each day. But can you believe even the name Malgudi came in for criticism? An uncle prone to drunken rants once visited Narayan's home and said, 'And what is this Malgudi? Where is it? Why do you want to write about some vague place not found anywhere while there are millions of real places you can write about? Don't write about unreal places. You must read Dickens' novels. You chaps think you're all very clever. I've read every line Dickens has written. There you have a model. Write like him.' Writing is hard work and calls for discipline, and this Narayan developed in plenty. At 3 o'clock after a cup of coffee, I wrote. Day by day, Swami was developing. The pure delight of watching a novel grow can never be duplicated by any other experience. I cannot recollect how much I wrote each day. Perhaps a few hundred words or 1,000. Swami, my first character, grew up and kept himself alive and active. I reread the first draft at night to make out how it was shaping and undertook until far into the night corrections, revisions, and tightening up of sentences. I began to notice that the sentences acquired a new strength and finality while being rewritten. This is a gold standard for every writer out there. Some of his very popular works are Swami and Friends, published in 1935, The Dark Room, published in 1938, The Financial Expert, published in 1952, The Guide, published in 1958, The Painter of Science, which was released in 1976, and Grandmother's Tale in 1992. He also dabbled with mythology in Gods, Demons and Others, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So why is R.K. Narayan important as a writer? The reasons are many. He was born in 1906, a time when India was yet to be an independent nation and we were on the cusp of change. He lived through the world wars, the independence movement, and saw the early days of India as a democracy and how it progressed till his demise in 2001. And he chronicled all of this in his inimitable style, writing in English but in prose that was as Indian as it could get. In that sense, he showed the world in India that was beyond snake charmers and kings. He threw the spotlight on middle-class India and the villages and towns that made up the country. And for a country that was still young and where people were taking to reading in English, Narayan provided an opportunity to read about themselves and their lives. He used what was an alien language to speak about deeply native things. He wrote about the seller of greens by the roadside, the market where fresh vegetables and fruits were sold, the bundles of grass meant for livestock, life in schools of those days. When you read it now, at a time far removed from then, you still identify with some parts of it and imagine with awe at certain others. For instance, the importance of the village postman, the astrologer, or the painter of science. He showed through his novels, short stories and essays that details mattered and that no subject was boring. The humor that ran like delicate lace through his writing was rooted and as native as it could get. For many, the goal even now is to write like R.K. Narayan, elegant prose that is not too verbose and where humor and humaneness shine bright.
You were listening to Shubha J Rao on the book My Days by R.K. Narayan. This was today's Voices from the Bookshelf. See you in the next episode.